we're back to focus on the National Male Talk Forum. And of course, this is being coordinated by the National Committee for Families and Children. There has been much talk about men's involvement in developing young boys and steering them on the right path, and also having male role models in society as well. So here to tell us more about the ongoing forums, we have Arthur Usher, who is a member of the National Parenting Task Force, and we also have Eli Romero, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer at the NCFC. Good morning.
Good morning.
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 And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
It's your pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
All right.
Likewise.
Thanks for the invitation.
So, Arthur, let's start with you and explain to us why there is a parenting task force and specifically having this male-centered approach.
Well, the Parenting Task Force is a initiative through the government, a national parenting task force, and it comprises of varying agencies with mandates to bring Belize up to its 2030 goals in terms of the rights of the child and how best we can make Belize a family-centered country. And so, as a part of that, we cannot make the country or make the society a stronger society without engaging men and boys at varying levels, especially on issues that specifically concern the family structure. And so, as part of one of our activities for this year, we're looking at the Male Talk, which was last week, Thursday. And so the purpose again was to discuss some of these issues, these burning issues that have been plaguing conversations around men for years. And so we specifically discussed the issue of custody and the issue of what constitutes rape.
So, when you talk about developing like your forum that you had on Thursday, you know, when we talk about men's representation, it's always a challenge in kind of broadening the perspective of men who are directly involved in their families or being a good role model. There's far more attention paid to men who are involved in negative activities. Let's shed light on that and how you think that has an effect on the overall structure in society.
Well, I guess we did discuss a lot of these issues and the negative imagery that is being portrayed about men throughout the country. And I wouldn't just say it's Belize, it's worldwide to some extent. We always joke that Mother's Day is more celebrated than Father's Day. Yeah. And that is a testament to I would say our cultural scope, right? So like I mentioned to the men in the Male Talk, to me it's cyclical, right? So the more we discuss the negativity, the more we see negativity, and so it's on us to then show the positivity. There are a lot of men, a lot of boys out here who are doing great work, yeah, and who are going through the day-to-day and being who they are and leading and all these other things, but we very rarely see that side. And so I think the more we showcase that side, the more the cycle will then change. And then the more you will see more of that. And so I'm sure if we go back in our history, we will see that the present situation was not always the case, right? And so we have to always try to look back and say, okay, but how do we do it better, yeah, right? And how do we change the cycle in varying areas of society and how men are viewed?
As a young black man in Belize society, would you say that things are moving in the right direction?
I really try to be so black and white with our directions. I wouldn't say right or wrong. I would say that there are areas that we need to change. the meal talk again. Discussion is something that that is important in order to change, right? So I think there are ways that we can discuss these topics and create change. I am disappointed in some of the things that I see on the media sometimes, and generally around us as men. But it's not hopeless, right? I think that we have a lot to contribute, and we have been contributing a lot. For some reason or the other, he has been gone on the radar, and so we have to kind of make sure that we bring it back to light, not to take away anything from any accomplishments that women and girls have made, but at the same time, going back to a bigger focus, which is the family. The family constitutes men, women, kids. So everybody has to play their part and be effective in their roles.
And Eli, what is your view on some of this, and perhaps you can shed some light on the importance of having had a forum like this?
So as NCFC, we really try to tackle a lot of the issues that affect children and families from a root cause. A lot of what we had discussed during the forum was what are the social norms, because a lot of the reason why we are, in terms of a society, how we view men and their role in a family is a lot because of social norms. We're groomed from a very early age to be providers, but not much caregivers, and that's one of the things that as the NCFC we really want to see how we can change that. When we look at the statistics at really how much men are actually involved in the lives of their children, in actual rearing, spending time with their kids, the numbers are really low. I think if I recall right, it's around less than 30% of men actually spend time with their children.
Wow.
Quality, active time with their children. If we don't change a lot of these things, then that tends to create that cyclical effect that Mr. Usher was talking about, that, oh, my dad was never there with me. So he was always working so that he can provide for us. Then we tend to look at it in a similar way. We're going to say, you know what, when I get old, I need to provide for my family. I don't need to be there once I can provide the financing that is needed for them to be okay. So we as men, we have this tendency to close ourselves. Actually, during the forum, I was running a joke with everybody that we had a prayer on the agenda from the very beginning, and I really wanted to see how it played out. Mm-hmm. Almost, you could barely hear any men even praying, and we were just on our Father we were saying. But you can see that men don't really open up and actually speak out. And I was worried a little bit that the session would have gone like that. But once the conversation started, you started to see all these other things that they were really interested and very engaged in.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah, I think the natural stereotype that people have is that men don't want to talk about their feelings, or they don't want to talk about this type of stuff. So when you get together in a room, how surprised are you by the level of participation that you have?
Well, one of the reasons why I think we got a lot of participation, and we actually got this from them, is that there were no women in the group. So they felt comfortable. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that a lot of the participants mentioned, that they really like the safe space for men to talk. And it really expressed how you feel about specific issues. Like we discussed the issues in custody. And one of the main things that really popped out as a real eye-opener was that we don't know a lot of the rights as men. We a lot of times don't even take the time to educate ourselves in the legislation that affects us in relation to custody and rape and all of these things. So when we start to hear all these things in the media, we start to say, but it is bias. Men don't have any rights. And that's not entirely true. Men do have rights in terms of custody, in terms of marriage, guardianship. Even in recent changes that have occurred in the law,
Yeah.
it has really been pushed to try to, as much as possible, make it gender neutral. So we really need to educate ourselves in what are the laws that affect us and how they affect us, and what are our rights as men, as caregivers, as fathers, as brothers and sisters, and all of these things.
How do you balance the approach? When you give statistics like what you just mentioned, I think you said about 30% of fathers report that they're actively involved in parenting the children. And then you have this very often generalization that men aren't as involved with the children. They're simply providers, not nurturers. And you talk about things like custody and looking at how people view men in the family structure. How do you balance the two perspectives? Because there definitely is some truth when you talk about lack of involvement, just merely by the 30% statistics that you speak of.
It's really hard because, like I mentioned, a lot of men spend more time in working. But that is slightly changing. We're getting a more balance now in our current society, whereby men and working are just as much as women now. But it goes back now that I think tackling the issue with men is one, but now in some cases we even have both parents not spending that much time with children. And a lot of it, I think, takes into, we put a lot of importance in providing services to our children. And that's not to say that that's wrong, because we want to give our children the best life as we can possibly give them. But sometimes we really need to sit down and think of the impact that the emotional, psychological parenting helps the child. The NCFC, and Mr. Arthur can talk a little bit more on this, is we have a parenting guide. And it's not a mother's guide, and it's not a father's guide. It's a parenting guide. And it is meant to guide the parent. And NCFC has actively been using this guide to facilitate training sessions with parents and future parents, so that they can look at it focuses on 3 main areas, and how we can give parents a little bit more of skills to be better parents. The training guide is actually called the Art of Parenting. And that's one way how we try to really help people and really look at parenting as not just providing for the child in terms of actual meals and services, but actually the emotional part and all of these things that really are important, and that might help a lot.
And looking, sort of at the bigger picture, were there was there any expressions of what can be done to address a lot of these issues, or were there any, or did some of the participants talk about some changes that they would like to see in order to perhaps level the playing field or make to improve some of these experiences?
Definitely. One of the main things that was discussed, if we look at rape, it's often in the way how it's worded, and the funny thing about it is that all these laws were written by men, but it seems very gender biased in a perspective. If you look at women who abuse of boys, the law is a little bit blurry in terms of accommodating that, because it specifically asks for the men membrane penis within the law. So it has been revised, some of those areas. So in terms of being it gender neutral, it is the description within the law is being broadened so that it can include everyone. So that is what, as it relates to rape.
And that was a critical development that happened when they updated that aspect of the criminal code, right?
Yes.
where for years men could not be raped by the definition of rape that was used within our laws. So that was definitely acknowledging where there are weaknesses, even within the legislation, that exclude men. But I want to move the conversation forward, and Arthur, get involved here to share. There seems to be, and it could be that it's just that my awareness of it now changes as you gain more experience, but it seems to be that younger fathers, or fathers in general in this day and age, are a lot more involved, and they seem to understand and recognize the significance of building a relationship with their young boys and young girls.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, again, change takes some time, and we've been discussing some of these issues for some years, and it's basically over this generation's lifetime. And so they've heard different conversations, they've seen different experiences with family structure and how things play out. Plus, as Mr. Romero mentioned, there's a duality in terms of shared responsibility with the family structure. And so I think there's more of a, I guess, family team approach being implemented in terms of most families. Albeit it might not be nuclear, but even within a single father home, where there's the father is the mother and the father, he's taking on this higher level role and responsibility. So we do see a lot of changes in that area, and that's great to see. The idea again is now how do our laws catch up with some of these cultural changes? How do we protect both sides in terms of the situation, right? And so while the dad might be the main parent in the situation, single or nuclear, the law might still say that the woman has custody, right? And he cannot do certain things without her. And so, again, we go back to our main focus, which is what is best for the child. If the parents are divorced or separated and so forth, is it in the best interest of the child to always have that child with the mother, or do our research say that it's best to have the child with the father right now? And so we have to look at these things as what is best for the child, what is best for the children, and how do we move forward with their lives in the best interest of them. Parents and so forth will have to just comply.
And on the issue of parenting, I imagine that it might have also been discussed, just the issue of raising male children and, socializing them to, one, adapt to all the changes that are happening in the world and gender equality, but also sensitizing them, changing certain past ways which may have been harmful. Can you talk a little bit about that discussion as well?
In terms of socialization for a male?
Yeah.
We didn't touch a lot on that, but I think in our small group discussion, some of that came up. I would say generally, I kind of get what you're hinting at, but again, the discussion was not solely based around that. We are looking at some of these machismo stereotypes and how do we teach our boys to cry, to express emotion, and not view it as being less than a man. And so with some of these issues, how do you release some of that emotional energy and still retain your manhood? And so our society is kind of stern when it comes to this, and we have to change our behavior. Again, as anybody with human behavior change takes some years, sometimes generations. And so we have to be patient and be steadfast with our communication, steadfast with how we view certain things, how we speak to boys, and how we speak to girls to then accept that new approach from a man or from a boy.
That's such an important point. I'm so glad you touched on that. So that's two things. First, I want to ask you both directly. How different is your parenting style from what your father's was? And how do you think you were able, I'm saying because I know you're a bit more, Arthur, how did you make that change? Because you only learned to parent from how you were parented. What made you recognize that you would have a different style?
Well, if I were to go back in time, I would say it started from introspection. A lot of times, we experience things in our lives and we can go one way or the other way in the middle. Yeah. And so we have to kind of be a bit introspective in terms of what do I want to change and who do I want to be? And so just going over your who you are, maybe once a year, sometimes people do it New Year's Eve. Yeah. But you kind of just reflect a bit about what you want to be and what you want to teach. And so, and again, no one style is perfect here. A lot of times people ask for very specific answers that, they want to be kind of cookie cutter. It's not that. Yeah. What works for you and what you want to achieve for your family and for your situation.
What would you say is the biggest difference?
The biggest difference in referring to
between how you were raised or how your father raised you versus how fathers of that generation raised their children versus today?
I would say listening. Like my dad's generation, there was less listening, and so I think for our generation there was a bit more listening to the child, and not directly with you're a child, you have to be seen and not heard kind of message. So we kind of give our kids a bit more voice when we listen and try to understand what they're saying. But one thing I believe that people should practice is that understand that your child might not be able to express exactly in terms that you understand, but they know what they want, right? And so give them the opportunity to say it, and then it's your job to kind of guide that from there. And that's what I would say in terms of the differences. Listening. And then acting, and rather than acting before listening.
That's just going back to kind of what I said earlier, that's a big, that's also a big change in terms of how we, raise and socialize children. I mean, just allowing them to have that voice, it makes a huge difference in how they express themselves and are they comfortable with other people and society in general.
Yeah, and let's jump into the other issue, and we're touching on the hot topic very late in this segment, but a very key element as we talk about men and understanding their role in raising children, in building families and being active in families, is also ensuring that women are open and adaptable to them having a shifting role from what perhaps they perceived growing up. Let's talk about how that complicates the issue as well.
I think a lot of times in regards of the shift there that has been occurring, I think it's in the family itself there's been a shift. And it goes a little bit back to the question that was asked a little earlier in terms of what has changed in terms of the norms now, and like I mentioned in the beginning, we try to tackle the root causes. If we really look at average size of families 30, 40, 50 years ago, they're much different now. I think because of the changes that have been occurring in our society, the cost of living, and all other impacts to the life that has made that a lot of that shift. So the responsibility isn't now only men that are responsible as bread providers, but also the mothers are also very actively involved. So that shift, I think, brings that. I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of the parts in the legislation had to also adapt and change. As I mentioned, even the Family and Children's Act has seen recent revisions.
Yeah.
There are even new revisions that are probably going to come in the near future, because you tend to look at it and you say, you know what, I missed something. And one of the things that everybody, we should maybe take the time to learn is, what are laws under the Families and Children's Act? What are the rights that we have? Both parents now, they can both apply for custody. Both parents, male and female, can ask for maintenance. If the woman is the one who is the main caregiver and they break up and he's taking care of the child, the man can actually go to court and actually apply for maintenance. The problem that we have is that, one, as a society, we see that as the machismo part of us. Yeah. Oh, that's wrong. There's something wrong. A man doesn't go and ask for maintenance from a woman. Yeah. And society, and even maybe the service providers, where you go and make the report at the police station, they might make fun of you. And that might deter men from actually going and exercising their right. But I think that is still slightly, it's really hard to change social norms. Yeah. That's one of the hardest things that anybody that works in this civil society and social work will tell you.
I was going to say that's a similar scenario, and perhaps the more common one is domestic violence against men, where we know that oftentimes that there are instances where men are abused within the household, but they wouldn't make a report because, you know, it's embarrassing or it's difficult to go into any institution and say that, because it's not so much about the physicality of whether or not he can or can't protect himself, is whether he chooses not to. So, you know, you're talking about breaking down social norms, and Arthur, I think you said it earlier, this is not the type of change that happens overnight. It's like chipping away slowly and expanding the conversation to one of not man and woman, but just humanity in general and equality. Where do you plan to take this movement that has started?
Well, we have actually multiple movements. I think the conversation has been happening across the board. The National Parenting Task Force, we do intend to have other meal talks and other conversations. We also, with the NCFC's help, plan to pick up the recommendations from each meal talk and see how far we can take them in terms of law, drafting better laws and more accessible, and making things more accessible for everyone. Yeah. So it's not just a talk shop per se. We do intend to make things a bit more tangible and have more conversations, and conversations in multiple areas. So not just Belize City, we will looking at the districts, and because some of the dynamics are different in each district, and so we have to get a conversation with men across the board to get a better feel for where we are. So it's the first, but it's not the last. The conversations were robust. You know, I want to thank the guys again, because it was truly an eye-opening day. Yeah. And we will be in touch with everyone. We got some other invitations from other men nice. Asking, you know, when again can you invite me? Nice. And so I think it's time for the conversation, and so we will be looking at it again and doing more and getting more information, getting more feedback. I think we call it a movement. I didn't see it as that, but yeah, in retrospect, it probably is a movement. And so we have to really make sure that we stay steadfast in our bigger goal.
Yeah.
And really moving things along steadily. Again, like I said before, it's not one day. It's something that's going to take some time, and we will be staying the course as it relates to all these issues.
Nice. Well, thank you both for joining us this morning and telling us about your male talks. And of course, we do wish you the best of luck. I know people can follow along on NCFC's Facebook page, and they can get information for when these things are happening. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we have the ladies who are solar engineers lighting up southern Belize joining us in just a few.